All right. Welcome to Advanced Child Protection with Reed Lukens. And yeah, unfortunately, I have experience in this kind of thing. And, and I'm talking about child molestation, and it's like, I had a 47-year-old child molester that went after my daughter, and that's just one of them. And so anyway, I kept asking myself, what am I going to do, if I don't pass this on and somebody who really needed to see this doesn't ever have a chance to hear anything about it, because you don't get the kind of information I have every day. And this is for you husbands out there. And there's plenty of us out there, okay, that are married to women that end up becoming full-blown child molesters. Maybe because we didn't get them into the psychiatrist on time, because they were molested as kids. Or maybe because we didn't know, because they could never tell us the truth. And this is for us. This is for you guys out there. And basically, ladies, if you're watching this, I'm going to have some good stuff in here for you too. As far as what you need to look out for in men and so on and so forth. But there's going to be things I talk about that women do that you don't ever hear about, which ends up putting them in prison. And one of the number one things is, when it comes right down to maybe killing a child, your own child, more women kill their own children than men do by far. Because men, we'll just pick up our kids, we'll take them over to grandma's and drop them off there. And you need to understand, no woman can hurt their own child unless there's mental illness involved. And this is what happened in my case. And, and I'm not doing this. I need to tell my story, so bear with me. This isn't, I'm trying to make it not come out all bad and stuff. I just want to tell my story, put it on here for the people that need to see it, because you're going to be looking for childhood sexual trauma and that kind of stuff, And this is what happens to women after they've been molested. And you need to understand that men who become child molesters more than likely were molested themselves, and they don't even realize that what they're doing is wrong. This is what happens in so many cases. So, yeah, that's my little disclaimer. I'm not here to point fingers, at who's who or anything like this and that. It's just, I have this knowledge, and if I don't share it, it just wouldn't be right for the people that would need to see it, because there's so few of us out there. 30, 40 years ago, there was so few of us out there. Nowadays, according to everybody I've talked to, doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists and, sheriff's officers and everything, this is running rampant these days. And people don't ever hear about it, so they don't know what's going on. So I'm going to kind of open you up, and you know what? If this is really hard for you to hear and listen to, then just turn it off. This isn't here for just anybody to watch. It's for people who are dealing with, maybe a spouse that was molested as a kid, and they're doing things that are just weird, but you just don't, that what they're doing is wrong, but you just can't put your finger on what it is that they're doing, So, let's begin. I did start this in the Bipolar Disorder Part 3, the Bipolar Disorder for Spouses Part 3, so if you want to go back and look at that part, you can, but I'm going to cover everything. That was just kind of an introduction, but not into the hardcore stuff really that I'm going to go into right here today. Well, let me tell you a story to start out with. It's not my story, it's a friend of a friend. And this friend of mine that had another one of his best friends was married to a female who was molested and turned into a child molester herself. So I'm going to tell you his story first and what he had to do for his wife. And I know the story myself, because the same thing happened to me, only mine's 100 times worse, because I didn't catch everything that she was doing psychologically to our children. Okay? And we're going to get into this. So, what do you do when your daughter comes up to you and says, Dad, Mom's acting really weird. She's coming in my bedroom at night, and she wants to touch me, and I don't know what to do. And what do you say to your kid, man? you know, and boy, that's something, I don't know what he said. He didn't get into that part. I know what I told my kids. I said, your mom's mentally ill, and we really got to watch her, and we got to protect her. At all costs, you got to make sure that your mom stays safe. And I told my kids this, my own kids. And so, this guy, we'll call him Steve, he takes his wife and takes her to the psychiatrist. And they'd been going, but it had been a number of years since they'd gone, and he'd found out that his wife was molested because she'd told him. And so he already knew all about it. And so when he finally got her back into the psychiatrist here, it was like 10 years later. The daughter was like 7, 8 years old. Okay, when mom started going in the bedroom and, wanting to have her way, which really wasn't nothing other than just fondling and, And the first thing he saw was the excited look on her face, okay? Because the women, it's so obvious when they're doing something wrong, because they get an excited look that you won't see any other time in their life other than when they know they're doing something wrong and they're doing it to children, and because they were molested and were at such a messed up state, when they were kids, being heightened, sexually, unfortunately. And so now you're going to see that heightened look on their face as adults when they're molesting your own kids in one way or another. And so he got Jeannie into the psychiatrist. And, the psychiatrist said, Steve, if you would have got in here a year ago, we could have done something, but it's too late. She's full-blown now. There's nothing we can do. You're just going to have to watch her. And so he brought his kids in, and they told him the truth about mommy and what they had to do. And, if mom comes in your bedroom, you tell her to leave, and you do everything you have to do, including kicking and screaming, and then calling for dad to have her get out, And this seems really hardcore, you guys, and, I'm trying to hold it together. This is part of my story, man, and even though this isn't my story, I had to do the same things. It's just so hard to talk about. Yeah, so Steve, he was just devastated because now, the love of his life, the woman he gave his vows to, to love, honor, and cherish in sickness and in health, was a full-blown child molester, and he was having to protect her from herself and what she was trying to do to their own children, starting out with their daughter. And so the first thing he did, after he told the kids what was going on and to be sure to not let mommy in the bedrooms at night, was he went ahead and he got a rope, and he would, my ears are all plugged up, I've got a cold. So what Steve did, he went out and he bought a nice soft rope, and he tried tying it around his wife's leg and tying it to his leg so that when they were in bed, trying to sleep, that she would not be able to get up out of bed without him knowing about it. Well, that didn't work. She got up real carefully and real gently because, she wants to molest her children. She wants to go in and fondle her daughter at this time the way she was fondled at that age, at the age of, 8 or 9 years old, And so she very, very slowly leans up, gets up, unties the rope real gently, lays it down, and tries to go in the bedroom, but, fortunately he'd already told his daughter, Sarah, you kick and scream and do what you have to do, and if mom won't leave your bedroom, you scream loud enough and I will come in there. And that's what happened that night, because Mom had gone up and untied her leg and gone on in there, and she tried to mess with Sarah, but because, you know, Sarah had a good dad, you know, and she loved her mom very much, she knew that she had to be there for her mom. And you know what? When you got kids that are dealing with this in your house, and they're trying to protect, you know, their mom, yeah, you got to really feel for those kids, man. I mean, you know, because there's no one that they love more than their mom. And when you have to tell your own kids that something terrible happened to mommy, you know, just breaks your heart, man. But anyway, yeah, so, but Sarah knew, okay? She'd been informed now, and she was protecting her mom at all costs, just like she's supposed to. This is all you can do. Okay. So Steve went ahead and, you know, put a lock on the door, and then went ahead and changed the locks on the kids' doors and put keyed locks in there. Keyed locks from both sides. You know, is it really safe? You know, if there's a fire or something, well, you know, when you have a mother that, you know, she's going to get up in the middle of the night and do what she can because she can't help herself, but to try and go into the kid's bedroom, you know, you got to do what you have to do. So he went ahead and put the locks on the doors, you know, and that stopped her for a little while. But not that long. I mean, for a while she would go to the door and she would, you know, try and get it open, just jiggle in the lock, then she would sit down in front of the door and start crying because she couldn't do what she knew that she was supposed to be doing in her own mind, was molesting her kids. And she knew, that's the thing, you guys, you got to understand, you know, the women, they're going to do anything they possibly can to get to the kids. Okay? They don't comprehend reality. They can't comprehend that it's wrong. It's what happened to them, so that's what they need to do to their own children. And this is where it all starts. And this is why child molestation lasts for 3 to 5 generations, generally in each family, you know. And I don't know how many generations it goes back in my wife's family. I have no idea. All I know is that, you know, I don't believe it's the first, because it's the last. It's not going to go past right here, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't go past you guys. Anybody that's having to watch this, you know. And so, you know, I mean, it's so hard to watch your wife sit in front of the door when you got the door locked, crying, "Please, please let me out. I love my kids. I have to protect them." And you're like, "Honey, you're not protecting them." "Yes, I am. I'm protecting them as much as I can. I need to be with them." You know? And you're like, they're totally safe. What are you protecting them from? You know? And with my wife, she goes, "I'm protecting them from you." You know? And, yeah, that was a real rude awakening, you know, when that happened to me. But anyway, so with Steve, let's get back to Steve. You know, I'm, as usual, from one subject to the next, but I'm still on the same basic story because he went through the same thing that I did exactly. You know, except he went through so much more and many more lengths of trying to do things than I did, you know, in a different way, you know, that fortunately I had enough schooling to where I didn't do this. So he went ahead and, you know, he put the locks on the doors, and she was satisfied with that for a short time. And the next thing you know, he woke up and she was gone. And they lived in a 2-story house, and she was climbing out the window and then shimmying her way across to the roof, going up over the roof, then back into the window in the kids' room. And this is how determined the ladies are going to be. They will do anything to get to their kids, to protect them. And this is what they're doing in their own mind, is protecting them. They're protecting their children. They're going to make them better. They're going to protect them from child molesters because they're going to let them understand what it feels like, you know, now when they're young. You know, it's just a twisted way of thinking. It's so hard to deal with, you guys. You know, I'm doing my best, just not totally break down, man. This is just so hard to talk about. But I got to, you know, because everybody keeps telling me, and this is unfortunately, even a pastor came out and said, look, you need to put this on DVD for people are going to understand it, and they can see it. You know, the things that you go through, that we went through, because it was just so hard, and I was so there for my wife and protected her at all costs from anything. You know, she's not in prison today because I would not do what the sheriff's office asked me to do. You know, I couldn't put my wife away, and they were okay because I told them that I would keep her safe, and that I had been keeping her safe for 20 years. Next thing you know, Sarah's unlocking the door. Dad's got his key, so he went ahead and got Mom back out of Sarah's room again because she had to go back in the window. You know, but fortunately, Sarah, she heard something coming across the roof. She didn't know what was going on. She, you know, her window was locked. All right, so Mom couldn't get in. I mean, you know, she was sitting outside the window, banging on the window. Sarah, open up, let me in. I'm on the roof, I can't get in. You know, with a big smile on her face, you know, telling her she loves her. You know, because, you know, she does. She loves her with all her heart. Unfortunately, because she's twisted, her heart's just in the wrong place. It's not that she doesn't love her child, she loves her child dearly. And she wants to make sure her child is protected from the pain and the hurt that she had to go through. So she's trying to inflict it on her herself, because it'll make it easier. You know? And so, Steve calls the security place and has them come out, and they put bars up on all the windows next. You know? And, you know, he continued taking his wife back into the psychiatrist, and they were trying to do whatever they could for her. The only thing you can do is hypnotherapy, trying to get it out of them to help, you know, to help lighten the load on you, because once they're full-blown, they're full-blown. And that's pretty much all I have to say for Steve. Unfortunately, you know, man, you just got to pray for this guy, because he's been dealing with this for a lot of years, man. You know, protecting his kids. It's not only that now, because his kids know. And when you have a husband and 2 or 3 or who knows how many children you've had with your wife, your entire family is protecting your wife and their mother from the outside world. Nobody's going to find out what's going on in your house, because you're not going to allow anybody into there. And now we're going to go into my story. You know, I think I already told you about in, oh no, that's right, I deleted all that stuff. Anyway, to make a long story short, in 1984, August, my wife tried to kill herself by duct taping ponchos all over the tub, you know, in the shower in our bathroom, and she was going to blow herself away. And so I called her sergeant, because she was near me, and they got us into the base psychiatrist, which is just such a miracle, because when you go to an Army psychiatrist, they are the best. They've seen it all, and they've seen it hundreds of times over, and this guy was a full-blood colonel, and he saw my wife, and he diagnosed her immediately. You know, it didn't take him more than 3 or 4 visits to have everything down. And so he called me in, you know, later on to talk with me. And he goes, you know, Reed, you need to understand something right now. You need to turn your back on this woman. She's lied to you about everything. She's not who she said she is. Nothing she's ever told you is true. She had a serious, serious past. She was molested between the ages of 9 and 11. And she's a full-blown child molester. And you want nothing to do with this woman. You know, that was in 1984. We'd been together for 2.5 years. We were still in our first year of marriage. But see, here's the thing. Because me and the way I am, I gave my vows to one woman. Love, honor, cherish, honor, protect at all costs. Okay. So I wasn't about to leave. I was just like blown away. I remember just shaking my head going, wow. You know, and here he's telling me that my wife's a child molester, and I'm saying, yeah, no way. You're lying, right? Well, as time goes on, you know, we continued going to the psychiatrist, and he kept telling me everything that was going to happen in our lives for the next 20 years. And he said that she had already molested children. And the thing is, she has a degree in early childhood development, which means, you know, she's licensed to work in preschools and that kind of stuff. And that was our first encounter. You know, she was working at the church down here, and you know, she was helping in the preschool there, and her mom had a preschool. And she wanted to go down there and help her mom, and I'm like, look, you know, you remember what the psychiatrist says? I mean, you're a child molester, you need to stay away from children. She goes, oh, no, I'm fine now, that was then. You know, and she gives me big hugs and tells me how much she loves me and how much I've done for her. And you know, and I didn't know. I mean, we already had 2 kids at this time. I think my daughter was 3, my son was 1. And, you know, so she was going down and helping mom at her preschool. And so I go walking in there one day, and I could hear my wife, you know, and I looked over and I could see all the kids were in the other room. It was nap time. But you know where your wife is. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know when you walk into a place that you know where she is. And I could hear her talking real quietly. So I walked over to this other room, and she had a little girl in there. And she's telling this girl, she's going, you know, don't you like Jimmy? Isn't he so cute? And she's just looking, the little girl's just looking at her and smiling because there was something about my wife, man. She will do anything she can to make a kid love her. You know, they have the prettiest, she has the prettiest smile, you know, and when she wants to be happy and when she has that excited look on her face, once again, the excited look, you know, and you mix that with a happy look when they're trying to molest a kid. Okay, it's a look that you won't forget, guys, and, you know, you'll know it when you'll see it, and you'll go, that's what he's talking about, because it's just that obvious to see. You know, it's kind of a smile. The eyes are big and bright, but at the same time, it's not right. You know, it's just, it's totally obvious. And so I go walking over there, and she doesn't know I'm there. The little girl's facing me, and she thinks she has this little girl all, you know, secluded and pulled aside from everybody else, which she has. But I just happened to get off of work and come over there to surprise him, just to say hi, you know, and I walked in on this, and the little girl didn't know what to do. And, you know, my wife goes, doesn't it make you tingle right down here? You know, and she pointed at her vagina. You know, doesn't it make you tingle when Johnny looks at you? Do you ever play with yourself down there like this? And she puts her hands down there on herself and starts playing with herself. And she looks, the girl says, you try it. And I'm standing there, and I got this look of horror on my face. And the little girl looks over at me, and so the next thing you know, my wife turns around, looks and sees that I'm there, and she smiles at me, thinking I'm going to approve of this. And she turns right back around to the girl real quick, thinking that she's going to get a hand in there or something. And she goes, go ahead and try it. And the little girl didn't know what to do, you know, because she's just a 3 or 4 year old kid. She wasn't even 4 years old. She had to be 3.5-year-old little girl. Okay. And my wife looked at me, and like I said, at that time when she smiled, and she looked right back at the little girl with this huge smile on her face, thinking that I was going to be, you know, happy. And so the little girl, she wasn't going to touch herself. She didn't know the first thing about it. Right? I mean, no kid knows that. And no kid should ever have to know that. You know, no child should ever have to know that. You know, ever. You know. And she goes, so my wife goes, here, let me show you. And she reaches over and she pulls out her diaper, and she goes to put her hand down in there, and I'm like, hey, 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 hey. No, 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 no. I stop her. And this is what I saw next. My wife stood up, just like a little 4-year-old herself, who'd been caught doing something bad, even with a thumb in the mouth, and looking down at the ground and looking back up at you, you know, knowing that they'd been caught doing something bad. You know, and that was when I realized that my wife, when she's doing this, okay, she's reenacting what's happening to her when she's a child, in a childlike state. You know. And so I stopped my wife that day. You know, and we told her mom that she wasn't going to be working in the preschool anymore because we couldn't afford the gas or whatever. And it was, I mean, it was like an hour drive to get to that preschool, but, you know, that wasn't the real reason. We never told anybody what happened, you know, and because I'd given my vows to protect my wife, and I did protect her. I just happened to walk in at the right time, and she wasn't there all the time, but she was there that day. You know, did she technically molest that little girl? Yes, she did. You know, should I have turned her in? You know, you got to protect your wife. You got to put her before everything else in the whole world. And that's what it says in the Bible, man. You know, and when you're married, you got to protect your wife. You know, and that was our first encounter with child molestation, and that was way, way back. And we're going back to probably 1992, 1991. Well, my son was 1, so it had to be 1992. Somewhere in there. He was close to 1 anyway. So I remember we were down there at the preschool, and I mean, Grandma never put him down because Grandma loved the grandkids, and, you know, that was my wife's mom, and she just, you know, she was good around the kids, man. She was a loving grandmother. Nobody could ask for a better grandmother and grandparents than my wife's parents. They didn't know what had happened to my wife. They had no idea, you know. So I want to make sure that you guys understand. I'm not trying to put the blame on anybody in their family. We don't know what happened. We don't, okay? All I know is, you know, we did protect her as much as we possibly could. And when I say we, I mean just myself and my kids, because I never told her parents until after, you know, I was left with no choice but to tell them, you know, when I brought the sheriff's office in and, you know, Child Protective Services years and years later, you know. So that's how I learned about what women do to little girls. You know, they're gonna make the little child love them. Okay? I mean, the kid is gonna fall head over heels in love with this person because she's gonna be giving them more attention than her own parents. I mean, my wife was glued to this kid, and she had been. I'd seen her glued to this kid, but I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, and she was just waiting for the moment, and I got there, and killed that moment. Okay, and we are so lucky I did. I mean, if it would have gone any farther, if she would have got her hand in her pants, if I would have caught her with her hand in the pants, I would have had to call the police, but fortunately, you know, like I said, my wife looked up. You know, she went over and, you know, I said, go ahead and try it. Gave her like 2 seconds, and the kid didn't know what she was doing, so she reached over and pulled out, went to put her hand down, and that's when I stopped her. She put her thumb in her mouth. She looked down. Just flashed her eyes back up, then right back down at the ground. Then she'd flash her eyes back up for a second and look right back down. She wouldn't look at me because she knew, just like a child, that she'd been caught doing something bad. You know. And so that ended my wife's preschool days. And I told her she had to quit being a church teacher, you know, for the preschool kids, or the kids in the nursery at the church. which she didn't do right away. There was more than one person in there, and this is what I ended up telling another pastor years later. As long as she's not left alone with a child, she's okay. And you can walk out in public, you can go anywhere and do anything you want together as a family. And they're fine. You'll never see her act wrong ever. And that's what I'm talking about. It's totally safe. So you don't have to protect them too much. It works out good. But yeah, she ended up staying down at the nursery in the church for a while. Off and on, she'd come home and say, "Oh yeah, no, I have to go to the nursery today." And I'm like, "What did we talk about?" Okay, you've already been diagnosed as a full-blown child molester. I caught you molesting that little girl. Okay? You can't go to the church. If you do, I'm going to call the pastor and tell him. And I didn't have much respect for that pastor, so I didn't go to that church very often. And back in those days, we got to understand, we're friends nowadays. We know each other. We're not really friend, buddy, but, we had a serious encounter, and we're good friends nowadays. Yeah, back in those days, I just, what are you going to say to the pastor? It's like, I figured the way I looked at it was, if they didn't do a background check on the people they had watching their kids, that's their problem. I told my wife that she wasn't going to be working in the nursery at anywhere, okay? And this is just how it was, flat out, period, because you couldn't leave her alone with kids, because she is the most loving person around children. I mean, it's the person that any normal husband or any normal wife is going to look on her and go, "Wow, that's the lady that I want to be with my kids," because, she loves kids so much. But what they're not realizing is she loves kids too much. She puts every ounce that she has of energy into those kids. Then she's going to isolate one of them away and molest them. And this is so common nowadays. You see it, you hear about it. Most of the time you don't hear about the women, you hear about the men. But the women, from what I have seen, for every male child molester that gets caught, there's at least one female that was putting their kids with this male that didn't get caught, because it's just so hard to catch. And so, yeah, she worked at the church a few times, but only when they said that they had absolutely nobody else. And I even called down there and I said, "Look, I really don't think my wife should be in the nursery, working in the nursery." And they're like, "Well, why?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's just, she's, And I said, "She's a manic depressive. You never know. Sometimes she might go out and she'll have an attack." I wasn't about to tell any of them the truth. There was no way. And I said, because sometimes she just kind of wigs out, and, you don't want to leave her alone. As long as she's in there with somebody else, she'll be okay. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, she'll be in there with somebody else, and we'll be sure not to leave her alone." And I'm like, "Okay, well, that's good." So I had that base covered. I didn't have to come out and just tell them flat out the truth at that time, And I never did have to tell them, as a matter of fact, And she was always good, and she was always great around the kids. And that was the one thing I got to say. Even though she's worst case scenario, when she's around kids and she has other adults around her, you could really and honestly couldn't ask for somebody better to be around your kids. But the only problem with this is she's too nice. And this is what you have to watch out for. You have to set boundaries. And, her boundaries pretty much just weren't there. She's going to hug them, and she's going to kiss them, and she's going to pick them up and play with them, and she's going to turn that crying child into someone who is just laughing as happy as possible, because she has that gift But it's that darkness behind that gift. That's what you have to watch out for. So, yeah. And I'm going to do the whole thing here in one series. I'm not going to just continue it in, a bunch of 40-minute segments, because I don't want to have to deal with this ever again. I'm going to say it this one time and be done with it. Because it's so hard to deal with and even talk about. And so years go by. Okay? And the next thing I know, I'm going to the church too, off and on, because my schedule doesn't allow me to go all the time. Because at that time I was working 6 days on and 2 days off, so once every 4 or 5 weeks, I'd get, a Sunday off here and there that I could go in. So the deacon, one of the head deacon of the church, comes up to me and goes, Reed, you need to keep your daughter away from this little girl that your wife's hooking her up with, because this little girl has serious problems. Sexual problems. And then we're talking about, it was a little 5-year-old girl, or 6 years old, I can't remember. I think she was trying to hook up my 7-year-old with a 5-year-old, or my 8-year-old with a 6-year-old, something like that. And this little girl had been molested as a kid. And she had serious sexual problems. But you know what? And so there was nothing I could do to stop my wife from putting these two together. Okay? And what I didn't realize at that time was this little 5-year-old, okay, had a 10-year-old older brother. And I didn't realize at that time, but their counselor told me that the child's parents, these kids' parents, had taken them, to like crank parties and sold these kids sexually so they could get their dope. Okay, and I didn't even know about the older brother at this time. But because I wasn't going to church there all the time, I guess the grandpa, because they were living with the grandparents now, because the parents were gone in jail or who knows where. I don't know what happened to them. But I guess the grandpa had stood up in church and said, look, this is what's going on. We have the grandkids now. They're safe with us, but you need to keep your kids away, and be really cautious, and especially keep them away from the older boy, because he had serious sexual problems going on. And at that time, he was just going to be coming out of child prison, where he'd been put in there for sex crimes. Real serious stuff. And here my wife is taking my daughter and forcing her to be friends with the little girl in his family. And people are talking to him saying, look, you need to tell him, you need to tell Mr. Lukens that he needs to keep his daughter away from her. Okay, and the next thing you know, I took my wife, and we went down to her parents' house and sat her down there at the dining room table, and it was her dad and her mom and we sat there and said, look, you can't put our daughter in danger, and put her together with this other little girl. And she's like, well, everybody needs a friend. She's such a beautiful little girl. We're like, no, this girl has serious problems. She's a bad kid. And, her dad, right then and there, he goes, if you put a bad kid with a good kid, you don't get two good kids. You get two bad kids. There's no way around it. And he was a parole officer for like 30 or 40 years. I mean, he'd seen it all. I mean, he was a very smart man, And my wife called us hypocrites, saying we're wrong, and she's going to put them together because they need to be friends, and, and that we were wrong, and the little girl needed a good friend like our little girl. And what I'm going to read now is the footnotes out of the Soul Care Bible. Okay, for what I just read about Lot giving his daughters, saying he's going to give his daughters to those people, because his daughters were standing right there. They heard him say that. And this is called Tragic Chain of Events. And if you have the Soul Care Bible, it's on page 27. All right, 27 pages into the Bible, we go into child molestation. Lot's terrible actions reveal the tragic chain of events that often occurs in sexual abuse cases. when he shockingly suggested that the evil men go ahead and rape his daughters instead of his guests. Lot was trying to substitute one sexual sin for another. And this is complicity, or sexual abuse of their person, when the parent sets up their sons or their daughters to be raped by somebody else, to use their penis, the penis of somebody else, to destroy the lives of their own children. As in the case of all sinful actions, the abuser usually fabricates a rationale for his or her conduct. You know, and I was kind of like, no. But there was nothing I could do to stop my wife from putting these two together. And even when you got your husband and her parents and my parents and everybody coming together and saying, look, don't do this, but I'm going to work and she's pretty much running her own life when I'm not at work, and my daughter is 8 years old by now. I didn't realize my wife was talking to my daughter, you know, and saying, oh, look, isn't this, you know, she has a good friend, you know, you guys are so much alike, you guys do all these things together, and the only reason they were doing these things together is because my wife was putting them together. You know, and the next thing you know, somewhere in there, she started saying, you know, when the older brother got out of kid prison, you know, oh, isn't he just such a handsome boy, and this and that, and, you know, trying to get my daughter turned on to him. You know, and I don't know the whole story there because all I know is hearsay because I was at work. And this is the hardest thing, guys and gals, you know, is when you have a husband and wife, when the husband's gone at work, he's having to leave the kids with the wife. And in most cases, he's leaving them with the wife because he knows his kids are safe with her. With me, a lot of times my kids were going down to grandma's, you know, with my wife. Just for this reason, because we didn't really like what we were seeing my wife doing, and then at the same time, because I wasn't here, I was having to work, I couldn't just stop her, because as soon as I left, she was going to do what she wanted to do, because she had free reign when I was gone. So it was very difficult, you know, to deal with. But this is what you got to watch out for, because we're going to go right back to the same thing that, you know, I said earlier. She's going to do everything she possibly can to molest those kids, and if she's not going to be allowed to do it herself, then she's going to get somebody else to do it. This is called sexual abuse of their person. This is what I started talking about back in my Bipolar Disorder for Spouses Part 3 at the very end when I changed it over to this. It's hardcore stuff, man. Complicity, sexual abuse of their person. You can look it up on the internet. The first time I ever saw it was when I realized that my wife had molested my daughter. When I read it in a book called The Wounded Heart. I don't remember what page, but I think it was page 57, where it went into it and started talking about sexual abuse of their person and how often it happens in churches and everywhere, and it's just so very rarely ever caught because it's so psychological that people can't put two and two together. And when I read that and I saw sexual abuse of their person, it was like, boom, there it is. I knew exactly what it was, what my wife was doing. And I knew at that time, because I'd been telling her, it's like, look, what you're doing is wrong. You're a child molester, flat out. What you're doing is wrong. You may not be molesting our kids, but what you're doing is wrong. Well, it turned out that, yeah, it was child molestation. And this is what it's called, sexual abuse of their person. This is when the female, usually, uses another person, usually a male subject, to physically molest their own daughters or their own sons homosexually. They're going to use a full-blown male child molester to molest their children. They're going to give your kids to this child molester saying, here, do with them what you will. Which is why I said earlier, behind every male child molester, from what I've seen, is at least one female child molester giving their kids to him. And this is where that trained eye comes in. You got to have this trained eye when you're looking at your wife to know when it is, and you have to say no. Pretty heavy stuff, you know. So anyway, my daughter becomes friends with this girl. And the next thing you know, she's going to take my daughter up and have her spend the night with her and her mom, because her mom came back from somewhere, we don't know where. Whether it was out of prison or jail or something, I don't know. I mean, you know, but now the son was back in the picture, and she's wanting to take my daughter up to spend the night in this house with an older boy in the house, and I'm saying, no, you know, that just doesn't feel right. I don't want my daughter spending the night with some kid that I don't know. You know, and she wasn't telling me about this family at this time. I didn't know. Other than I didn't know that the older brother was even messed up, because I wasn't in church that day. The grandpa had come out and told everybody about the kids. All I knew is I didn't want her with my daughter, the little girl and my daughter together. And yeah, so I don't know. You know, I don't know what happened up at that little house up there they had way up here in the mountains. You know, did something happen to my daughter there that I don't know about, you know? Well, I think things got started there. Because a few years down the road, we're going to speed up from when they were 8 to somewhere around 11, 12 years old. You know, this younger girl who was 2 years younger, so let's go with 12 and say she was 10, she knows all about boys. You know, this little 10-year-old. And she's trying to do everything she can to hook my daughter up and get her a boyfriend. This 10-year-old is trying to get my 12-year-old a boyfriend, and we'd already told my daughter, or I had, no boyfriends till you're 16, period. Well, we're already 49 minutes into this. I'm going to have to cut it off here. That was pretty much the end of this first part. And like I said, this is a continuation from what I had put in the bipolar disorder for spouses, worst case scenario, which was in part 3 where we started going into this in the first place. So I will make the rest of it and put it on here later, and that is when I'll end up going into what happened later on down the road, and between, you know, this time where this ends and that time when my wife introduced my daughter to a 47-year-old registered sex offender that my daughter pointed out to me on what I call childmolester.com, which is actually Megan's Law, and you'll find that under your local sheriff's office /Megan's Law dot whatever state you're in, ca.gov, which is here. So I think, if I remember correctly, it's for where we are, is Placer County Sheriff's Office /Megan's Law .ca for California .gov. So it'll be, you know, .nv for Nevada or whatever. And yeah, so I'm going to have to let it go here because it's already been too long. We're looking at, you know, I don't want to have you guys sitting here for over an hour. I mean, yeah, it's really important stuff. And you know what? I hope you guys are really blessed by what you've heard tonight. And understand that this is my story, and it's really hard to tell, but this is what happened. Everything that you heard tonight is already on file with the Placer County Sheriff's Office. Okay, and you know, we ended up going hardcore, and I ended up bringing CPS in, and they ended up taking our son away from her. You know, unfortunately, because we had no choice, because, you know, she wouldn't listen when we said, no, you can't do this. You know. And it was really a shame to watch her go down that road and choose to leave us because we weren't allowing her to do what she thought God was telling her to do, you know, which was molest our kids. You know, so she left us and pretended that, you know, I was this bad person, and ended up going to the pastor here in the town here and telling her all this stuff, and he met me, and she actually had the gall to try and send me to him for anger management counseling. And you know, with me, I just went down there, and in 2 or 3 visits, he's scratching his head going, "Why are you here? You don't have an anger problem." And I'm like, "Yeah," you know, and, you know, he goes, "She says that you're divorcing her." And I'm like, "Yeah, and I've told you it's the other way around, and she's lying to you about everything," which is what I was told. But anyway, yeah, so I'm not going to get into that in this one. It'll be another part. I thought it was going to get it all done in this part, but like I said, it's already been probably 53 minutes now, and I don't want to go any longer. Yeah, I hope that you guys that needed to see this got something out of it, because there's a lot of important stuff in here. Learning about sexual abuse of the other person, learning about that look on their face, you know, when they're looking down in shame after they've been caught, and they just glance up at you, but they won't keep their eyes on you, and they'll just turn away. You know, my wife actually went and stood in the corner on her own, just like a kid that didn't have to be told. You know, she must have gone under some severe punishment at some time from somebody, you know. But, you know what? All we can do as husbands, just like with Steve. Steve is still happily married today. He's got grandkids. Okay. Yeah. So Steve and Jeannie, they have grandkids. And they're still together. But see, the thing is, I don't know if she had bipolar disorder or not. With me, in my case, because my wife is worst case scenario, we are no longer together because it got to the point where I couldn't control her when it came to, you know, keeping her out of my son's bed. You know, like I said, we ended up going through the same thing, and my son ended up throwing her out of his bedroom. And we'll go into that too later on. I'm just going to ramble on and make it another 2 hours long, and fortunately I've got a pretty much open-ended series I can do here. Thank you, YouTube, for putting up with my rambling and giving me all the time I need to tell my story. You know, it's a severe story, and I pray that none of you have to go through it. And I also pray that the ones that are going through it are getting what you need to know to help protect your family out of this. Once again, God bless, man, and good night.